Hello, my name is Dave Fletcher. I'm from the Plainfield branch of Kent District Library, and the following program is presented as part of KDL's commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. All questions have been submitted by members of the community. While our speakers may not have the time to answer every question that's been submitted, we have tried to offer a fair representation of the questions received. Antiracism is, according to Georgetown African American Studies professor Robert J. Patterson, quote, an active and conscious effort to work against multidimensional aspects of racism. More than being passively not racist, anti-racism is about actively working to create change. In this series, we will be talking with parents, law enforcement, community leaders, and more about what is being done and what can be done to actively and consciously work against racism. Our guest today is Ken James, Director of Inclusion with the Grand Rapids Chamber. Ken's career has spanned a variety of industries, not-for-profit, healthcare, retail, higher education, and municipal government. One of Ken's greatest passions revolves around the world of equity, diversity, inclusion, and initiating cross-cultural dialogue. Ken enjoys combining his knowledge and experience to deliver creative programs to employers and their stakeholders. Ken is currently the Director of Inclusion with the Grand Rapids Chamber. He's part of a team that delivers diversity, equity, and inclusion services to the business community. This includes 5 cohort-based leadership programs and 3 engagement programs offered by the Grand Rapids Chamber. Ken has a master's degree in public administration from Grand Valley State University and bachelor's degree of public administration from Kentucky State University, where he also played football. Ken is married and has 3 daughters, ages 16, 14, and 13, and we are happy to have you here today with us, Mr. Ken James.
David, thank you for that introduction. And those of you tuning in, thank you for being a part of this wonderful discussion as we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. As David shared with you, my name is Ken James, and I am the Director of Inclusion for the Grand Rapids Chamber, where we deliver diversity, equity, and inclusion programming for the business community and the community at large. Those programs include a diversity, equity, and inclusion assessment, implicit bias training, the Institute for Healing Racism, and cultural and communication training. I lead this as part of a team of other individuals that have subject matter expertise around these topics. I'm a 26-year diversity, equity, and inclusion professional. Dave mentioned my educational background. I have a master's and bachelor's in public administration. I've been doing diversity work for 26 plus years, and I am also a executive certified diversity coach through Coach Diversity Institute. And I am indeed happy to have that honor and hold the first designation of that honor, not only in West Michigan, but the state of Michigan at large. The timing of this, in my opinion, is very great because there are a lot of optics, is the word I will use, of DEI lenses taking place in the community, especially as it relates around law enforcement and the intersection in the Black community. So I'm pleased, Dave, to answer the questions on behalf of your members, and hopefully that we can shed some more light around these topics.
All right, well, let's get right into the questions. Starting off here, in terms of race and anti-racism, what are the biggest issues Kent County is currently facing? And is there any progress being made?
Thank you for that question. And before I answer that, I would like to give this disclaimer. I'm bringing my lens of lived experience as a Black man. I'm bringing my lens as a diversity, equity, inclusion professional for the last 26 years, but I in no way speak for everyone. But these are my perspectives. But that being said, in the 26 years that I've been in West Michigan, has there been progress and traction? The answer is yes. I do see more walking the walk to go along with talking the talk, if you will. So I'm starting to see a lot of initiatives from the business lens around having equitable conversations. From the world that I live in, that is access to jobs and employment, not just minimum wage, but livable wages. That's access to capital. That's access to having a seat at the table. So I have seen these things trend in a positive direction, So there's some positivity there. However, we have a long ways to go. We're starting to get some traction. And things that I can see is the open dialogue of how do we fix what has happened in the past, or having the realization that silence is no longer an option because our silence has been complicit. So people are asking questions. How can I not only recruit and attract diverse talent, if I'm using that example, but how can I retain that talent? And that's a conversation that hasn't happened in a lot of spaces. So to affect retention, we're starting to see change in culture. How welcoming, how belonging am I in the business community? So I say I want a rich, diverse workforce. Am I willing to make the change internally so that workforce wants to stay in my organization? And that does lead to a return on investment. So what we have now is businesses that make that investment in cultural change for positive impact for diversity, equity, inclusion. We're starting to see an uptick in their innovation, an uptick in their return on investment, an uptick in their revenue generation and creation. So to answer that question, yes, we've made strides, but we have a long way to go.
Certainly we do. Speaking to companies and hiring practices, what can companies and organizations who are seeking to have more equitable hiring practices do? Where can they turn? How can they level the playing field, as it were?
Mm-hmm. So I would answer that question, my lens. I'm a big proponent. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can look at lessons learned and best practices from the driving organizations in this community, from driving organizations in this region, or even nationwide. Now, sometimes you have to take that as a model and tailor it to fit your specific organization. So if you are a manufacturing firm and you're looking at a healthcare model, there might be some similarities there that you can build from and tailor it for your organization. But also, I believe in the power of storytelling. I believe in the power of analogy. I am from the lens of you either win or you learn. And so organizations that are willing to take a chance, they're going to win or they're going to learn because there's a positive outcome. So specifically to diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'll offer this analogy. I have a lot of well-meaning individuals come to me and say, Ken, I would like to have a workforce that mirrors our community, or a workforce that mirrors the constituents that we serve. And that is a very noble thing for someone to say. So they immediately think that recruitment is the answer. And I'm all for recruitment. But I also challenge them to think about, do they have the culture in their workforce to retain said talent? So it could be something as, building from those companies that have floating holidays. So people that come in from different religious backgrounds that need to observe those things. Those things aren't easy to do. And again, when you make those small changes, they have huge impact. Is the environment welcoming? Lactation rooms, paternity leave for men and women. Do they have same partner benefits? These are things that we want to ask that help create the culture that impacts retention. So I answer that question by, making these steps, which in my opinion are necessary. It does impact the bottom line. And there's another analogy I use with this storytelling that I have. If I were to challenge anybody watching this conversation right now to go to Forbes.com, premier business writing for decades, if not almost a century. And if you went to Forbes.com and went to their search bar and typed in diversity, equity, and inclusion, what you would find is hundreds, if not thousands, of articles would pop up over the years that have had those key phrases, diversity, equity, inclusion. And you would see titles like, workforces that are more diverse are 2.5 times more likely to turn a profit. C-suites that have women as part of the C-suite are 6 times more likely to be profitable. These are real articles that I've read and I'm sharing with you. But the key thing is that part is that culture piece. You have to create an environment where you recruit the individuals, but those individuals can bring their authentic selves to work, where they are valued, where they can speak up at the table, where they can share their ideas and different ways of looking at things and finding the blind spots and addressing those things. When those things come together, that's when those key things take place in the organization, where you can impact that return on investment. So that's it. So recruitment is a piece of the puzzle, but retention is the key to moving this forward and making it be successful.
That is an excellent point to keep in mind. And I guess before we get further into the discussion here, one of the questions asked was, should a principled approach to race and racism be based on equality or equity? We used to use the term equality much more, and now we're kind of moving towards equity. I'm wondering if you could explain the difference and
Hmm.
why
Hmm.
one or the other is more
Hmm.
important.
Hmm. Absolutely. So we want to have access. So we want to be equitable with that, and to address that. So let me use this example. I'm going to give the word difference between treating someone fairly and treating someone the same. So I'll use this example. So right now, Ken is a middle school teacher for this example, and I have an assignment. I have assigned to my middle school students that I want you to do research on alligators. Okay, and I'm making this up as we go, just so you know. And but I want to send my point. And so I say I'm going to treat all my students the same. Here is the assignment on alligators. I want each of you to go home and look in. I'm from the generation your encyclopedia, or take your library card and go down to your local Kent District Library, or ask your mom to borrow their laptop and look up alligators. And tomorrow morning, I want each of you to share with me what you learned about alligators. And I'm not going to deviate from my assignment at all because I treat all my students the same. So let me counter that a little bit. I am a middle school teacher and I treat all my students fairly. And I know that not everybody has someone that can take them to the library to look up an assignment on alligators. I know some people don't have access to a laptop or Wi-Fi at home. So again, I'm not lessening my assignment, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to treat them fairly. So I'm going to say, here's the assignment. It's a few days in advance. But for those of you that can't look up those things at home, we're going to spend 10 minutes on the next couple of days looking up alligators so that you can have that done here. Because what I'm doing is I'm going to treat you fairly, not the same. And those are the nuance when you talk about equality and equity. Oh, I do the same thing for everyone, but that doesn't mean the same thing. So put it in a business setting. If you take that same example, everybody needs to come in Saturday at 6 p.m. to sign up for the new benefits. What does that mean for the people that use public transportation? What does that mean for the people that are sharing, one car? It's just a thing. So what I'm offering is the lens of you can treat someone fairly or you can treat them the same. And when you talk about the equity piece, that is treating people fairly, making sure that you've taken everything into consideration so that everyone has the same bite of the apple. And sometimes these are just minor things. And sometimes this comes from awareness. So when we talk about having that rich tapestry of diversity in an organization to help with your blind spots, you might not consider that offering something outside of public transportation hours is a barrier to someone. You might not understand that doing that after hours event might impact someone that is a single parent or doesn't have access to childcare. Something that we just might take for granted because it's not our reality. But when we think about that, we want to make sure we have those lenses. So again, I'm just talking about these things that impact individuals that sometimes we take for granted. But I will say it's a learning process and to offer yourself grace. I haven't known everything that I know now. It's from experience. But at the same time, what I didn't know that was perpetuating certain things, once I became aware of it, I did my best from that moment forward to change. Years ago, I was part of a team that coordinated a program for the community. And we talked about equity and access. And we had it at a public institute that was on the bus line. But what we did not consider was what time the buses stopped running. So this was an after hours program that people that use public transportation could get to the program, but when the program was over, they could not get back to their destinations. And that was an oversight on our part. So what we did was going forward, we will make sure we don't make that mistake again. And then also we made sure we had people that on the planning committee that could help us see the blind spots of our well-intentioned outcomes. And so those are the things. So it's a learning process. So when you talk about equality or equity, you want equity. But if you back that down into being the same and being fair, what you want to be is fair. And that's my answer to that question.
It's a wonderful example. We all make mistakes. The more we acknowledge our mistakes and our blind spots, the better we can do to correct them. Right.
Yes. Absolutely.
Um, Another question came in. What's the best way to bring up anti-racism in conversation? What strategies can I use when I hear something that a friend or family member says that I think is inappropriate?
That is a great question, and I have again my opinions on that in doing this work. So the one thing is, know your reality where you're at. And if you were ever to come to a presentation where I'm in front of a group, there are certain words that I use over and over. One of them is grace, which I've shared already. Give yourself grace, because sometimes you have new awarenesses and you didn't know that you were subconsciously or inadvertently perpetuating something. And so give yourself grace. But the other thing is you want to use your assessment. So I am a person, I don't engage in argument or debate, but I can engage in dialogue and discourse. And so after I've used my assessment and know that this is a safe space, we don't want anyone to be uncomfortable, and something that I can lend my expertise to, then I will engage in that. But it's an awareness piece. So one, have you thought about it from this? Appeal to a person's principles. If you hear something that's racist or bigoted, um, you strike me as a fair-minded person. When you say something like that, do you realize you're stereotyping a whole group of people? That's just one approach to do that. Or the other thing is, think of it from this lens. If someone is perpetuating something that you know is negative, you would never want them to embarrass themselves or to be in a situation later. So I always look at it through that lens. Hey, just so you're aware, when you use language like that, that might be offensive to a lot of people. And again, another real life example. I was having um, dinner a couple of years ago with someone that's very close to me, and they used a very outdated phrase unintentionally. And we were out to dinner, and they referred to people of Asian descent as Orientals. And I thought about it for a moment. And I said, I would never want this person to be uncomfortable or in a situation where they could be embarrassed. And I share with them, I say, hey, the term Oriental is an outdated term. My practice is, if I know if someone is of Asian descent, I refer to them as Asian. But I'll go a little bit further. If I know what country they're from, I will refer to that. If they're Vietnamese or Cambodian or Laotian or Japanese or Chinese or Korean, I will address them where they are. But just so you know, when you use Oriental, it's a little bit offensive, and someone might take that out of context and look at you as unaware. And that was the way I handled the situation. And that person was very receptive and said, thank you. I didn't know that. That was just a term that I grew up using, and I didn't know it had evolved into something else. And so when we think about it just from those steps, we want to impact others, that's one way. But when it's a little bit deeper, when you hear a racist or a bigoted remark, if it's safe to say, hey, you strike me as a fair-minded person. Why would you say something like that? That usually 9 times out of 10 will bring the person back. But if it is that person that is extreme, and I'm not naive, I know there are people that choose to be derogatory to a certain group of people for whatever reason. In this case, let's just say race. In that, then you can also say, this is my space. So when you engage in dialogue like that, or whatever it is, not in my workstation, not in my car, or maybe I don't want to have lunch with you if you're willing to take that stand. But the thing as we build up to this, give yourself grace if it's a new awareness. If you are in a situation, appeal to a person's higher principles. Use your discernment and make sure the place is safe, and then be prepared to draw your line for people that are resistant to what you're trying to present to them. Thank you.
So the question that came in is, what actions are being taken by community leaders to illustrate their commitment to their community in terms of equitably treating all citizens? And I'll add on to that. What do you think can community leaders do to illustrate their commitment to the community?
Mm-hmm. Great question. And again, my opinion, I think if I were to answer that question in 3 actionable steps, and this might not be in the correct order, or it might not fit the organizations that someone may be referring to, but I think self-awareness would be one step. Is one, just be aware of your surroundings, your situation, your awareness, how you interpret things. That is a learning process. So that's one thing, that I would share is to be self-aware. Two, how can I be part of the change? So once you become self-aware, what is the thing that I can do to make a difference? Is that initiating a dialogue? Is that starting a series? Is that bringing in a speaker? Is that starting a book club? Is that releasing a series of articles just to talk about and to introduce the other ideas? And the other one I'll say is, how can we keep the conversation going? So again, I am from the frame of mind that once we take steps, we have to sustain it, because it can be equally as damaging when you talk about something as polarizing as the issues surrounding diversity, equity, inclusion. When you're talking about someone's race, someone's heritage, country of origin, gender, sexual orientation, so on and so forth, religious, how they identify in their religious beliefs. Those things are very polarizing. And if you initiate something and stop it, that could be even more damaging to something that you haven't drawn attention to. So how I, again, giving you an analogy, is think about this is once, and this is from an organizational perspective. Once you realize, okay, here's my self-awareness, here's what I want to do. Now I have to keep the conversation going. And it could be one step. It could be that again, that book club step, that lunch and learn step, that conversation step, that sharing step. How do we keep it going? So I want everyone that may be watching this to picture right now in your mind. Picture Old Faithful at Yellowstone National Park, where it's this exciting eruption and it goes up and people respond to it, but then it goes away. I also want you to picture in your mind Niagara Falls, where you have this cascading waterfall that's steady and it continues on. When it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion work, DEI work, the Niagara Falls approach has the likelihood of being more effective than the approach from Old Faithful. And let me break that down a little bit further. George Floyd and what happened to him last year could be viewed as a Old Faithful approach. Wow, something polarizing happened. I want to bring my team in together and we're going to spend an hour talking about race. Now we've checked the box and we moved on. That could be damaging. However, George Floyd brought the attention of the conversation around race in my organization. And what we want to do is continue this conversation so that we can break down these barriers going forward. We're not going to peel back all these layers and not do or say anything else about it going forward, because that in itself has damages. So it's already polarizing, like I shared earlier. But if you continue to work at it, the chances of it being effective go up tremendously. So going back to what steps you can take is the self-awareness. It's in introducing what's best for your organization or your family or your place of worship group, wherever you're introducing this. And then what's the plan to keep that conversation going forward? So those are the 3 steps that I would recommend in moving this conversation forward. Thank you.
Oh, that's a wonderful analogy, Old Faithful versus Niagara Falls. I'm going to steal that. I'll credit you.
All right, there you go. It's not trademark.
Okay. So another topic has come up about helping out Black-owned businesses. What's being done and what can be done to help promote Black-owned businesses here in Kent County and surrounding area?
Great question. So I do work for a chamber of commerce, and we are all about business sustainability and business growth. But a few things, again, just to stay online with my storytelling and analogy. One, I'm very pleased to announce just today, the same day we're doing this conversation, David, the Grand Rapids Chamber announced 3 new business councils. There is a Black Business Council, a Hispanic Latinx Business Council, and an Asian Business Council. And this is a response to what has happened in the pandemic to address those equity things we talked about earlier, access to capital, access to supply diversity and those things. So there are efforts that are in place to help bridge the gap, to make sure there are things in place to have, so everyone can have their share of that bite at the apple that we use so much. But the other thing is just being intentional and being aware about ways we can make an impact. So as a consumer, we have every bit of influence on where we put our dollars. And so if you want to be intentional about once a month, I'm going to patron a woman owned or a veteran owned or an LGBTQ plus owned or a person of color owned or a BIPOC owned business. That's a choice you can make as a consumer. For those of us that have spheres of influence in our organizations, where we can think about where we get our goods and services from. You know what? My organization, again, arbitrary numbers, I spend $10,000 a month on subcontractor services. Maybe it's who washes my windows. Maybe it's who vacuums my floors. Maybe it's who brings in my toilet tissue. Whatever that is. You know what? I like to see 30% of that go to companies that are women owned or minority owned or veteran owned. They can do that. And then thirdly, for some of the larger employers out there that might have access to this, how can I help skill up businesses so they are able to compete for these subcontract dollars? And so that is, am I willing to make sure that the bid process is barrier free, to make sure it's easily found on my website so that people understand what they need, to bid? If not, I'm just willing to have a conversation with them, and over the phone or via Zoom. Here's what you have to do to bid on this company, or let them know when you bid on this job. You might be a small-owned business. You might be, in this case, for an example, you might be veteran-owned, and you're used to producing 1,000 units per month. Are you aware that if you take this contract with me, that's going to go to 10,000 units per month? What infrastructure do you have in place? Do you have the boxing up to get that to me? Do you have the fleet to get that out? If not, let's make sure we're on the same page. Just so that we don't have any problems down the line. So that's just some ways when you think about a broader lens, how we can impact the community from the community at large to people that may come from a marginalized background, where we spend our dollars, being intentional about who we subcontract with, and thirdly, are we willing to walk alongside some of those contractors to make sure that they're able to compete.
What organizations in the area, particularly those started and led by BIPOCs, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, are already working to deal with racism, and how can we best support them?
Mm-hmm. Again, I don't have the exhaustive list, but I can tell you, because of the work that I do, I overlap largely in the community. And so there are organizations you can go to find out where you can spend your dollars. So the West Michigan Hispanic Chamber of Commerce is a place you can check out to look at their membership roster and see, hey, how can I engage more there? GRAB, the Grand Rapids African American Business Group, GRAAB. That's a place where you can see specifically Black-owned businesses and how you can engage with them and to patronize them. The other thing is, the Grand Rapids Chamber. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our organization. I'm easy to find. GrandRapids.org is our website. Ken@grandrapids.org is my email address, and I'm happy to make those referrals and contacts that I have of the women-owned businesses, BIPOC-owned businesses, Latino-owned business, LGBTQ plus businesses, just to say, there are ways that we can do this. But specifically, and that's about supporting the businesses. When you talk about tearing down racist ideology and racist structures, again, we have a fine program called the Institute for Healing Racism. Again, I'm not going to sound too salesy here because I'm here for this conversation, but that's just a way where you can develop an individual action plan and talk about just the issue of racism. But there are individuals that I could help convene to have that conversation that are, in place to do this. There is an African American Heritage Fund that's held at the Grand Rapids Community Foundation. There's GRAHI, the Grand Rapids African American Health Institute, that talks about the access and equity in healthcare and the disparate healthcare. The other one, through Spectrum Health, they have healthier communities that address a lot of things that impact the person of color community at a higher rate. When you talk about birth weights and birth mortality, smoking cessation, diabetes awareness, hypertension awareness, healthier communities through Spectrum Health advances that. So those are the things that come to the top of my mind. Again, the West Michigan Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, GRAB, GRAHI, Grand Rapids Chamber, Healthier Communities, part of Spectrum Health. These are the things that come to mind when we talk about addressing some of these inequities in our community.
Well, and it's nice to know that those groups are out there. It's not about reinventing the wheel necessarily so much as it is supporting and getting involved with the groups that are already there and helping them work, push their agenda. Um, so I thought this was a particularly interesting question that came in. Someone asked, how can we keep the focus on Black lives and experiences rather than on white feelings?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great question, and I had a chance to think on that a little bit. So again, I've said it before. This is my opinion on that. As my lived experience combined with my work experience, having conversation around this, just remember it boils down to we can look at the same thing and have a different awareness of what we're seeing because we grew up differently. Our experiences are different. Perception and reality, is what takes place. So I answer that just because it hasn't been your experience, it doesn't mean it didn't happen to that person. So I will give you, again, another example to kind of reiterate what I'm talking about. So Champ Bailey, some of you already know who that person is. For those of you that don't, he is an NFL Hall of Famer. And he played for the Denver Broncos, actually won Super Bowls with them. And the reason this story sticks out to me, I'm a football fan, but I was watching Champ Bailey's Hall of Fame induction a few years ago. And during that Hall of Fame induction, he used this story that sticks with me to this day. He talked about being a Black man. Champ Bailey is Black, raising Black boys, but he was a local celebrity. He played for the Denver Broncos. He had won Super Bowls with them. He was pretty recognizable in that community, but he happened to live in a gated community in an affluent part of town. And because of his athletic schedule, late at night, early in the morning, he might be going or coming from home. And he was being pulled over at an alarmingly high rate because he was a Black man in a nice car in his gated community. He brought that situation up to his neighborhood association. Hey, this is happening to me. It was dismissed. Oh, Champ, that can't be the case. Do you think that's what's happening? Champ, come on now. It never happens to me. And then he also, because it continued, actually shared it with the front office of the Denver Broncos. Hey, this is what's happening to me. Again, it was kind of dismissed. Are you sure that's the case? So when someone is telling you what's going on, just because it's not your experience, it doesn't mean it isn't happening. And I share that story as that's the starting point. So if people are telling you, I'm not comfortable in this environment, or I feel a certain way when I leave here at night, or when I'm coming here before the lights are on, or this is kind of what happens to me in the morning, just because it's not your experience, it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. So I think that's a starting point to realize we have our lived experiences, we have our realities. And then as we learn more, how do we respond? How do we address those things? But I think the commonality starts with someone sharing their experiences and understanding, even though it's not my experience, it can indeed happen. And then once you're aware of that, if you choose to, how do you take action to combat that? Again, if you look at, things the way that I see them, you probably could agree that people that come from marginalized communities may have situations that people that don't come from those communities, experiences that you can't identify with. But once we have that commonality, we can find a cohesion point and move forward from there. So I know that's a broad answer. I didn't go into specifics, but I think the starting point is having that awareness of, because that hasn't been my experience, understanding that it doesn't mean it hasn't been someone else's experience. Now, how can we dialogue through this?
All right. Well, obviously, these are issues that are sadly not going away anytime soon. But let's look ahead and let's see what can we do. What plans are in place? What ideas are forming about building bridges in the community here, specifically here in West Michigan, but all over as well. And what to you would real progress in terms of West Michigan becoming more anti-racist, what would that look like to you? What would you like to see happen to show that West Michigan is moving in the right direction?
Mm-hmm. And my answer to that is one, please don't take this out of context. There is a saying from the civil rights movement from the 60s that you can't let a good crisis go to waste. And so I'm not minimizing what's been taking place around this country that has brought a lot of things to the forefront, but I'm just restating that analogy because now people are having conversations, or at least their sensitivities have been heightened by everything that's taking place. And right now we can look at Minnesota as an example of those heightened things there. So the outcomes of that, having these conversations, silence is no longer an option. Help me understand, what it's like to be a person of color, or help me understand Black Lives Matter. Help me understand, what I'm not seeing. These things. So I think there's an opportunity to find some dialogue, to find some foundational pieces we can move forward on. And then also what comes out of that. So again, I'm going to give you another acronym, but Grow 1000. Out of last summer's situations in downtown Grand Rapids when people were protesting George Floyd, and some of that had turned violent. And by the way, I don't condone destruction of property or violence. But the Grow 1000 came out of that. So Grand Rapids City Manager Mark Washington brought in a framework, said, let's employ 1,000 young people, in the community, and bring business together and municipalities together to really employ these students out of our community. And it was really a Kent County movement, and that was something very rich to see. But it came out of something. The spark was negative, but it turned into a positive flame, if I could. And so, how do we, come together and continue those conversations? Help me understand. Let me see it from your angle. What am I missing? How can I be more aware? How can I not perpetuate stereotypes, or how can I not contribute to microaggressions by heightening my awareness? So that's kind of my response to that. Again, it's very macro what I'm saying, but how can we take these opportunities and move it forward so that we're not, making the same mistakes? We're either winning or we're learning. So that's my answer to that.
Well, we certainly have a lot of learning to do, all of us. But we're about at the end of our time here. Is there anything that you would like to talk about? Any initiatives you want to bring up, or any things you want to address that we haven't gotten to yet?
One, thank you for the opportunity. I don't take the invite lightly to do this. I am all about having dialogue. I'm all about the action that comes out of the dialogue. So anyone that may tune into this, if you would like to participate in dialogue with me, I'm happy to do this. But I would say, challenging organizations like the Kent District Library, where knowledge is power, and where we can have conversations and then learn something new, or gather the information from varying viewpoints to come with a better informed decision. So anything that advances that, I'm a part of. If you don't mind me sharing, David, Ken at grandrapids.org, I can be reached. Grandrapids.org is the Chamber's website. Keyword diversity, that you'll find me that way as well. But I want to be part of the solution. And so thank you for doing this. Let's keep the conversation going, and let's find that common ground, because at the end of the day, I think we have a ways to go, but there's power in West Michigan, and I think we can make it more powerful if we work together.
Well, thank you so much, Ken. This has been fantastic. I appreciate your perspective and your time.
Thank you very much. And again, I appreciate the opportunity.
And thanks everyone for the questions you submitted. And we will continue on this conversation at another time. Thank you.